Hi there. Today we're going to explore the plot of the 2014 film Chef. Carl Kasper loved cooking more than anything else in the world. The only thing he cherished more than culinary art was his son Percy. But family life didn't work out. He divorced Inez, and now the boy lived with his mother. Despite this, Carl often spent time with his son, although sometimes due to work, he forgot about their arrangements and arrived late for meetings. That's what happened on the day when a famous food blogger, Ramsey Michel, was supposed to visit the restaurant where Carl worked. Picking up Percy late, Kasper took him to the market to buy fresh ingredients for the kitchen. Then they had a snack, and the father promised his son a trip to New Orleans. Before the critic's arrival, the restaurant owner, Riva, showed up. He wanted Ramsey to leave satisfied, so he ordered the chef to cook only classic dishes without any experiments. Carl tried to object, but in the end, he had to agree. The dishes failed to impress the reviewer. The critic declared that the chef had lost his touch and was no longer capable of creating anything remarkable. Together with his friends, Carl read the review in a bar. He had hoped for praise, but the reality was the opposite. The only one who tried to cheer him up was Molly, a colleague from the restaurant. She let Carl cook dinner for her to lift his spirits. After the crushing article, Kasper spent the weekend with his son and learned that Percy dreamed of seeing his father's kitchen. However, Carl never took the boy to work, not wanting him to hear his swearing. One day he arrived at the restaurant earlier than everyone else and prepared a new dish that his colleagues really liked. But Riva refused to add it to the menu, believing they had to serve only what regular visitors were used to. Later, Martin and Tony told Carl that people were writing many unpleasant things about him on social media. To check for himself, he asked Percy to create an account for him. Carelessly, Carl publicly replied to Ramsey Michel's harsh review. The next morning, almost 2,000 people had subscribed to the chef's page, and he received another biting comment from the critic. Not wanting to look defeated, Kasper wrote that he was ready to cook again for Ramsey, a dish that would surely impress him this time. Subscribers quickly spread the news, and a huge crowd showed up at the restaurant. But Riva once more forbade Carl to experiment. Either he followed the owner's rules or resigned. Carl chose the latter and left his job. Ramsey showed up for dinner, but upon learning that someone else, Tony, was cooking instead of Kasper, he posted another mocking tweet. Furious, Carl rushed to the restaurant and caused a loud scandal. The video of the quarrel ended up on YouTube, and masses of people subscribed to his account. But now he was popular in a negative sense. No restaurant wanted to hire him. Despite this, Carl was invited to a TV show, but he declined. Without work and money, he told his son that the trip to New Orleans had to be postponed. After the scandal, Carl met again with Martin and Tony. The latter was now the head chef, and Martin had been promoted to sous chef. Kasper held no grudge against Tony for not supporting him in the conflict with Riva, and Martin said he would follow his chef anywhere if Carl ever decided to return to cooking. They truly had become real friends. Meanwhile, Inez asked her ex-husband to look after their son. Carl had plenty of free time now, and she needed to fly to Miami on business. Percy's nanny was afraid of flying, so this was Carl's chance to spend time with his son. At first he refused, but Inez eventually convinced him. Arriving in Miami, they go to see Inez's father perform. He sings at a restaurant, and Inez wants her son to see his grandfather on stage. When he finishes, all four of them go to a Cuban restaurant. The local food appeals to Carl, and Inez hints that he could do even better. All he would need is to get a food truck and start cooking on his own. In fact, Inez had planned this conversation in advance and had even spoken with her other ex-husband, Marvin, so that he could provide Carl with a truck. Marvin, a wealthy businessman, playboy, and philanthropist, considered it a trifle. Learning that everything had already been arranged, Carl agreed to meet with him, since he really had no other choice. Inez's ex-husband greeted Carl as if they were old friends. He joked about his wild personal life and even carelessly mentioned his relationship with Inez after her divorce from Carl. Naturally, this stung Kasper, but in the end Marvin still handed him the truck. However, it turned out to be an old, run-down vehicle that needed serious repairs. During the preparations, Carl called Martin and told him that he was soon to become the owner of a small restaurant on wheels. Hearing this, Martin immediately bought a ticket and flew to Miami. Meanwhile, Inez brought Percy to his father. The boy immediately began helping with the truck's repairs, but Carl proved to be too demanding and at one point raised his voice at his son. Percy was hurt and walked away, but returned after his father sincerely apologized. Together they went to get kitchen equipment, and upon returning, they found Martin by the food truck. He said that he wanted to work with Carl. Percy also joined in the cooking. They prepared test dishes for the future menu and treated the workers who had helped load the stove into the truck. Everyone was delighted, and at the same time Carl taught his son some culinary secrets. After a long and exhausting workday, the three of them sat down to rest. Percy jokingly tried a sip of beer, but he didn't like the taste at all. What Percy did manage to convince his father of, however, was to let him join the trip together with Martin. They planned a small tour of several cities in order to attract more people to their food. Percy had already arranged everything with his mother, so Carl had no choice but to include him in the team. The next morning, Martin drove up to the hotel with the refurbished and freshly painted truck. The three of them set off for the coast and began selling food. A huge crowd of people gathered. Everyone shared their impressions on social media, and the fame of Carl Casper's food truck spread quickly. A local police officer showed up because of the commotion. He had seen the video with Carl and asked to take some pictures with him as a keepsake. Carl had to agree. After that, the officer politely asked them to leave the beach, since selling food there was prohibited. On the road, Percy photographed everything around them and posted it on social media, raising the food truck's popularity even more. He even filmed short clips with the idea of later editing them into a larger movie about their journey. Carl suggested stopping at a theme park, but Percy insisted that they had to go to New Orleans. There, he wanted to try the city's famous local dessert, beignets. Arriving in New Orleans, Carl takes his son to a French cafe and treats him to sweet donuts. Percy enjoys them so much that he immediately posts on social media where they are. At that very moment, Martin is left alone to fend off a crowd of hungry customers who found out that Carl Casper's food truck is in town. When Carl returns, he sees a huge line and rushes to start cooking. In the process, he learns that it was thanks to Percy's tweets that so many people gathered there. After feeding everyone, they continue their journey, and on the way, stop at a small restaurant where a few pieces of legendary grilled meat had been specially set aside for Carl. After tasting the dish, Carl takes some with him into the food truck to use it later as inspiration for his own recipes. Then, together with Percy and Martin, he stops by a street stage where musicians are playing and begins selling food. Customers are everywhere. The demand is overwhelming. During the work, Inez calls to find out how her son is doing. Percy tells his mother that he loves her, but she thinks it was Carl who said it and responds to him in the same way. Earlier, she had explained to her ex-husband that nothing had happened between her and Marvin after the divorce. They had only had a calm conversation and shared a glass of wine. This was important for Carl to hear because he still had feelings for Inez. And Percy could never understand why his parents divorced if there was still trust and warmth between them. In the evening, when all the food was gone, Carl and Percy sat on the roof of the food truck to finish watching the concert. It was a tender moment between father and son. Such moments did not happen often for them, but Carl had to tell the truth. When the school year began, Percy would no longer be able to work in the food truck. He needed to focus on studying. The boy was saddened, but he accepted his father's decision. He just didn't want to part with him, because this summer had become a true celebration for them. When Carl brought his son home, Percy asked for permission to post the video he had been editing from the short clips of their journey. At first, Carl wanted to watch it himself. Back at home, he opened the video and was deeply moved. All the vivid moments they had lived through together flashed before his eyes once again. This made Carl change his mind. He called Percy and told him that they could continue cooking together, but only on weekends. At the same time, all of Percy's earnings would be deposited into his personal account. When the next workday at the food truck came, Inez was helping Carl. At that very moment, Ramsey Michel approached and asked Carl to step aside for a conversation. He confessed that he had asked a friend to buy food from Casper's food truck and was astonished at how delicious it was. Then Ramsey proposed to end their feud and become partners. He had sold his website and now wanted to open a restaurant. At the same time, Michel promised Carl complete creative freedom, no restrictions on the menu or on the way he worked. Carl agreed, and just 6 months later, they hosted a private party at Ramsey's new restaurant. It was there that Carl and Inez celebrated their wedding once again, this time for real, surrounded by friends and loved ones. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this recap, give it a like, leave a comment, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.